The chief of surgery grabbed Dr. Nathan Cole's arm at 11:47 p.m. and said 5 words that should have ended everything. "Nathan, you need to stop." But Dr. Cole looked at his mentor, the man who'd trained him for 7 years, and did something that would either save a life or destroy his career forever. He kept cutting. What happened in that operating room over the next 43 minutes would become the most controversial case in St. Vincent Memorial's history. And the 19-year-old girl on that table? She had no idea that her life was hanging on a single surgeon's refusal to follow a direct order. Let me take you back to where this really started. St. Vincent Memorial sits in the heart of downtown Detroit, a Level 1 trauma center that sees everything from gunshot wounds to industrial accidents to the kind of car crashes that make even veteran paramedics go quiet. It's the hospital where careers are made and broken, where residents either become exceptional surgeons or wash out trying. Dr. Nathan Cole had spent 11 years at St. Vincent, first as a wide-eyed surgical intern who threw up after his first trauma case, though he'll never admit that now. Then as a resident who slowly earned a reputation for staying calm when everything around him was falling apart. By the time he made attending, the nurses had a saying about him. "If Cole's on tonight, we might actually go home on time." He was 38 years old, married with 2 kids, and he had the kind of quiet confidence that comes from having opened up hundreds of human beings and put them back together again. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't the surgeon who strutted around demanding everyone acknowledge his genius. He was the guy who showed up early, stayed late, and had an almost unsettling ability to make the right call when seconds mattered. But on this particular October night, that reputation would be tested in ways Nathan Cole never imagined. It started with a phone call at 8:34 p.m. Nathan was in the surgeon's lounge, halfway through a turkey sandwich and trying to video call his daughter for her birthday, when his pager screamed. Trauma activation, ETA, 4 minutes. Motor vehicle accident, 19-year-old female. Mechanism, T-bone collision, driver's side impact, prolonged extrication. He kissed his phone screen. His daughter was already laughing at something her mum said in the background and headed for the trauma bay. The trauma team was already assembling. Dr. Rebecca Okonkwo, the emergency medicine attending on duty, was barking orders to the nurses. She was a 15-year veteran of emergency medicine, the kind of doctor who'd seen enough death to know exactly how fast it could come. "What do we know?" Nathan asked, snapping on his gloves. "Paramedics called it in as a bad one," Rebecca said, her voice tight. "College student named Mia Torres. Rideshare driver ran a red light doing 50, hit her driver's side door. Took fire department 18 minutes to cut her out. She's been hypotensive the whole transport." Nathan felt that familiar cold focus settle over him. Hypotensive after blunt trauma usually meant one thing: internal bleeding. And 18 minutes of extrication meant 18 minutes of bleeding they couldn't control. The ambulance bay doors burst open. 19-year-old female, GCS12, BP 78/50 and dropping, pulse 130, 2 large bore IVs running wide open. We've pushed 2 litres of saline. Nathan's eyes went straight to the patient. Mia Torres was small, maybe 5'3", with dark curly hair matted with blood. Her face was pale, almost grey, and even from across the room he could see the unnatural angle of her left arm. But it was her abdomen that made his stomach drop. Distended, rigid when he pressed his gloved hand against it. Classic signs of intra-abdominal hemorrhage. "She's bleeding internally," Nathan said. "Get me a fast exam now." The ultrasound confirmed what he already knew. Free fluid everywhere. Around the liver, around the spleen, pooling in the pelvis. This girl was bleeding out inside her own body. "How much blood do we have available?" Nathan asked. 4 units, O negative, standing by. More on the way from the blood bank," a nurse called out. She's going to need all of it, and then some. Call the OR, tell them we're coming up hot. And someone get me Dr. Harrison. Dr. William Harrison was the chief of surgery at St. Vincent Memorial. At 63 years old, he'd been cutting for longer than most of his staff had been alive. He was the one who'd recruited Nathan straight out of residency, who'd mentored him through his first solo operations, who'd vouched for him when the hospital board questioned whether he was ready for attending privileges. Harrison was also the man who'd taught Nathan the most important lesson of surgery. The OR is not a democracy. When you're the surgeon, you make the calls, but you better be damn sure you're right. Harrison arrived in the trauma bay 6 minutes later, still in his street clothes. He'd been at a hospital fundraiser, and there was a smudge of cocktail sauce on his collar that nobody had the nerve to mention. What do we have? Nathan gave him the rapid-fire summary. Mia Torres, 19, MVC with driver's side impact, hemodynamically unstable, free fluid on fast, probable splenic laceration, possible liver involvement. She needs an X-lap, Nathan said. Exploratory laparotomy. Open her up, find the bleeding, stop it. Harrison looked at the monitors, then at Mia's ashen face. Her blood pressure was down to 72/48 now. Her heart was racing at 140, trying desperately to pump blood that wasn't there anymore. Take her up, Harrison said. I'll scrub in with you. But what neither of them knew, what nobody knew yet, was that Mia Torres wasn't just bleeding from her spleen. She was bleeding from something that wouldn't show up on any scan. They got Mia to the OR at 9:23 p.m. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, took one look at her vitals and shook her head. She's circling the drain. If we don't get control in the next 20 minutes, we're going to lose her. Nathan made his incision at 9:31 p.m. The moment he opened her abdomen, he knew they were in trouble. Blood, dark, venous blood, flooded the surgical field. The suction couldn't keep up. It was like trying to empty a bathtub with a coffee cup while the faucet was still running. I need more suction, and get me another 4 units of blood up here now. Her pressure's dropping, Yuki called out. 68/40. She's not going to tolerate much more. Nathan's hands moved fast, searching through the blood for the source. He found the spleen first, ruptured, just as he'd suspected. Grade 4 laceration, most of it was destroyed. Splenectomy, he said. I'm taking the whole thing. It was the right call. The spleen was beyond repair. But even as he clamped off the splenic artery and began removing what was left of the organ, Nathan had a sinking feeling. There was too much blood. Way too much. Something else is bleeding, he said. This isn't just the spleen. Harrison, who'd been assisting on the opposite side of the table, nodded grimly. Check the liver. Nathan's hands moved to the right upper quadrant. The liver was bruised, but intact. No significant tears, no active bleeding he could see. Liver's okay, it's something else. Mesenteric vessels? Nathan checked. The major blood vessels of the intestines were intact. He was running out of obvious sources, and Mia was running out of time. Pressure's 62/38, Yuki announced. We're losing her. I'm starting pressors. That's when Nathan felt it. His fingers, searching through the blood, touched something that made his heart stop. A pulse. Deep in the retroperitoneum, the space behind the abdominal organs, he could feel a pulse. And it was getting stronger, which meant only one thing. Oh God, he whispered. She's got a retroperitoneal hematoma. It's expanding. Harrison's head snapped up. What? She's bleeding behind everything. The aorta or one of the iliacs. I can feel it pulsing. Now, let me stop here for a second and explain why those words sent ice through everyone in that OR. The aorta is the main highway of the human circulatory system. Every drop of blood in your body eventually passes through it, A tear in the aorta is one of the most lethal injuries in medicine, and a retroperitoneal hematoma, a blood collection behind the organs, meant that injury was hidden in the most dangerous possible location. Most surgeons are trained to follow a simple rule. If you find a retroperitoneal hematoma from blunt trauma, you don't open it. You don't touch it. The pressure of the blood pooling there might actually be tamponading, plugging the hole in the vessel. If you release that pressure by opening the hematoma, you could unleash a hemorrhage that no surgeon on earth could control. Harrison knew this rule. Nathan knew this rule. Every surgeon in America knew this rule. Don't touch it, Harrison said. Pack the abdomen and close. We'll transfer her to vascular surgery, get her stabilized, do an angiogram, maybe coil the bleeding vessel. It was the textbook call, the safe call, the call that followed everything they'd been taught. But Nathan was staring at the monitors. Mia's pressure had dropped to 58/34. Her heart rate was 160 and climbing. The pressors were maxed out. She was dying in front of them, and the bleeding wasn't stopping. She won't make it to vascular, Nathan said quietly. She's exsanguinating right now. If we don't find the source and fix it in the next 10 minutes, she's going to code on this table. You don't know what's in there, Harrison said, his voice sharp. Could be the aorta itself. Could be the iliac bifurcation. You open that hematoma. You could be facing a hemorrhage you can't control. You could kill her faster than the injury will. She's dying anyway. The OR went silent. Every nurse, every tech, even the anaesthesiologist, they all stopped and waited. This was the moment. The decision point that would determine everything that followed. Harrison's voice dropped low, almost gentle. It was the voice he used when he was about to deliver bad news to a family. Nathan, I've been doing this for 35 years. I've seen 100 surgeons open retroperitoneal hematomas against protocol. You know how many patients survived? Nathan said nothing. 4. Out of 100. Those are not odds. That's a death sentence. Harrison paused. She's 19 years old. She deserves to have a chance, however small. Don't take that away from her by playing cowboy. Now, before I tell you what Nathan decided, if you're the kind of person who can't stop listening to stories like this, hit subscribe. I put out new ones regularly, and trust me, some of them make this one look like a warm-up. All right, back to the OR. Nathan looked down at Mia Torres. 19 years old, college student, somebody's daughter, somebody's friend. She'd probably been texting someone when that rideshare driver ran the red light. Maybe laughing at a meme. Maybe complaining about a professor. Living her life one second, dying the next. And now her life was in his hands. Literally. I'm going in, Nathan said. Harrison grabbed his forearm. Actually grabbed it. In 30 years of surgery, Nathan had never seen a chief of surgery physically restrain an attending. Nathan. Harrison's voice was hard now, all the gentleness gone. That's a direct order. Pack the abdomen and close. Now. She'll die. She'll probably die anyway, but at least she'll have a chance. Nathan looked at his mentor, the man who taught him everything, the man who trusted him when no one else would. And then he said the 5 words that would change both their lives. I'm sorry, Dr. Harrison. He pulled his arm free, and he kept cutting. The moment Nathan opened the retroperitoneal space, blood erupted like a geyser. It was worse than he'd feared. The suction couldn't begin to keep up. Within seconds, his hands were invisible beneath the flood. I need more suction! Another one! Get me 2 more units of blood, now! Pressure's crashing, Yuki shouted. 52/30! She's coding in 60 seconds if you don't get control! Harrison had stepped back from the table. His hands were up, like he was physically distancing himself from what was happening. His face was unreadable. "You're on your own," he said quietly, then louder. "Let the record show that Dr. Cole proceeded against the direct orders of the Chief of Surgery." Nathan didn't have time to respond. His hands were moving through the blood, searching blind, feeling for the tear that was killing Mia Torres. The aorta. He had to find the aorta. His fingers found the spine first, the vertebral bodies, hard and reassuring landmarks. He moved laterally, feeling for the great vessel that lay just in front of it. There, the aorta, pulsing weakly now because there wasn't enough blood left to fill it properly. He traced it downward, toward the iliac bifurcation, the point where the single aorta divides into two vessels, one for each leg. And then he felt it. A tear. A ragged 2-centimeter tear in the left common iliac artery, just below the bifurcation. Every beat of Mia's heart was pumping blood directly out of this hole and into the retroperitoneal space. "I found it," Nathan breathed. "Left iliac artery. I need vascular clamps. Now." The scrub nurse slapped clamps into his hand. In surgery, you learn to work by feel. You can't always see what you're doing, but Nathan Cole had spent 11 years building a mental map of the human body. He could close his eyes and navigate someone's abdomen like a sailor reading the stars. He placed the first clamp above the tear. The blood flow slowed. He placed the second clamp below. The geyser stopped. "Bleeding's controlled," Nathan said. "Get me a 4-0 proline. I'm going to try a primary repair." "Her pressure's coming up," Yuki called out, her voice shaky with relief. 64/40. Still critical, but it's coming up. Nathan's hands were trembling now. Not during the crisis, but after. That's how it always works. You hold it together when you have to, and then your body betrays you when the worst is over. But the worst wasn't over, not really. Because now Nathan Cole had to repair a major blood vessel in a 19-year-old girl, against direct orders, in a surgical field so compromised that most surgeons would have given up and prayed. The repair took 43 minutes. 43 minutes of the most delicate suturing Nathan had ever done. The iliac artery is about the width of your thumb. The tear had shredded the vessel wall. Normal surgical technique was impossible. There wasn't enough healthy tissue to work with. So Nathan improvised. He used a patch technique, taking a small piece of Mia's own tissue and using it to reinforce the repair. It was a technique he'd read about in a journal article 3 years ago and never thought he'd use. At 12:34 a.m., he released the clamps. The repair held. Mia's blood pressure climbed, 80/50, then 92/60. Her heart rate dropped from the terrifying 160s down to 110, then 100. "She's stabilizing," Yuki said. There were tears in her eyes. "Oh my God, she's actually stabilizing." Nathan stepped back from the table. His legs felt like water. He looked at the clock. 12:41 a.m. He'd been operating for over 3 hours. Harrison was still in the OR. He hadn't left. He'd watched the entire repair without saying a word. Now he spoke. "Get her to the ICU. Post-op monitoring every 15 minutes. I want vascular surgery to scope that repair first thing in the morning." Then he looked at Nathan. "My office, 7 a.m. Nathan didn't sleep that night. He sat in the ICU, watching Mia's monitors, jumping every time a number flickered. He'd bet his career on that repair holding. If it blew, if the patch failed and Mia bled out, he would never operate again. And worse than that, a 19-year-old girl would be dead because he'd been arrogant enough to think he knew better than 35 years of surgical experience. At 3 a.m., Mia's mother arrived. Elena Torres was a small woman with the same dark curly hair as her daughter, and her eyes were swollen from crying. Nathan met her in the family waiting room. He explained what had happened, the accident, the surgery, the repair. He didn't tell her about the conflict with Harrison. That wasn't her burden to carry. Is she going to live? Elena asked. Nathan took a breath. She made it through surgery. The next 24 hours are critical. If the repair holds, if there's no infection, if her body handles the stress... He stopped himself. This woman didn't need statistics. I think she's going to make it. Elena Torres reached out and grabbed his hand. She didn't say anything. She just held on. At 6:45 a.m., Nathan walked into Dr. Harrison's office. The chief of surgery was already behind his desk. He looked like he hadn't slept either. There were 2 cups of coffee on the desk, and he pushed one toward Nathan. Sit down. Nathan sat. For a long moment, Harrison said nothing. He just looked at Nathan with an expression that was impossible to read. Do you know what I've spent all night thinking about? Harrison finally asked. Nathan shook his head. I've been thinking about a case from 1987, before you were even in medical school. A 23-year-old construction worker fell off scaffolding. Same injury as your patient. Retroperitoneal hematoma, iliac artery involvement. Harrison took a sip of his coffee. I was the young surgeon then, full of confidence. Thought I knew better than my attending. I opened that hematoma against orders. What happened? Harrison's jaw tightened. The patient bled out on my table. I couldn't get control. He was dead in 6 minutes. Nathan felt the blood drain from his face. That's when I learned the rule, Harrison continued. Don't open retroperitoneal hematomas from blunt trauma. Don't play cowboy. Don't let your ego kill your patients. I didn't... Harrison held up a hand. Let me finish. He stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the city waking up below. That patient in 1987, his name was Michael Torres. Nathan froze. Torres? Harrison turned around. Elena Torres's brother, Mia's uncle. The one she never got to meet because I killed him on an operating table 37 years ago. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. You knew, Nathan whispered. When you saw her name, you knew. I knew. I've spent 37 years thinking about that young man, about his sister who came to the hospital not knowing he was already dead, about the family that never recovered. Harrison's voice cracked slightly. And last night, when I saw the same situation, the same injury, I couldn't let it happen again. I couldn't watch another Torres die on my table. So you told me to stop. I told you to stop because I was afraid, because I've been living with that guilt for almost 4 decades, and I couldn't bear to add to it. He looked up at Nathan. But you know what I realised watching you work last night? Nathan shook his head. I realised that 1987 Nathan Cole might have saved Michael Torres, because you didn't let fear make your decision. You let the patient make your decision. Harrison picked up a piece of paper from his desk. Vascular surgery scoped your repair an hour ago. It's holding perfectly. They called it elegant, said they couldn't have done better themselves. Nathan let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. You broke protocol, Harrison continued. You disobeyed a direct order from your chief of surgery. By every rule in this hospital, I should be suspending your privileges right now. He slid the paper across the desk to Nathan. Instead, I'm putting a letter of commendation in your file, and I'm recommending you for the chief of trauma surgery position when I retire next year. Nathan stared at the paper. I don't understand. Because sometimes the rules are wrong, Nathan. Sometimes the protocols were written by people who were afraid, by people who'd failed and couldn't face failing again. Harrison smiled, a tired, sad smile. You did what I should have done 37 years ago. You gave a Torres a chance to live. Mia Torres woke up 3 days later. Her first words were about her car. Apparently, she'd just finished paying it off. Her second words were asking for her mum. Her third words were complaining about the hospital food. Nathan visited her room on the fourth day. She didn't know his name, didn't know that he'd held her life in his hands while her blood filled his operating field. "You're the surgeon," she said. Her voice was still weak, but her eyes were bright. "Mum told me what happened. She said you saved my life." "I just did my job." Mia shook her head. "She also told me something else. About my Uncle Michael. About how he died a long time ago from the same kind of injury." Nathan nodded slowly. "I heard." "She said the surgeon who operated on him still works at this hospital, that he's the chief of surgery. Is that true?" "It's true." Mia was quiet for a moment. "She's not angry at him, you know. She was, for a long time. But she says she understands now. Medicine isn't perfect. Doctors aren't perfect. They're just people trying to save other people." She reached out and grabbed Nathan's hand, the same gesture her mother had made 4 days earlier. "She also said that maybe, in some weird way, her brother's death saved my life. Because it made that surgeon careful. Made him create the rule that everyone's supposed to follow." "The rule I broke," Mia smiled. "The rule you knew when to break. There's a difference." She was discharged 2 weeks later. Elena Torres sent Nathan a card. Just a simple thank you card with a photograph inside. The photograph showed a young man in a construction helmet, grinning at the camera. On the back, she'd written, "Michael James Torres, 1964 to 1987. I finally got to tell him that someone finished what you started." Nathan kept that photograph in his office for the rest of his career. Dr. Harrison retired the following spring. At his farewell dinner, he gave a speech about the nature of surgical judgment, about knowing when to follow the rules and when the rules fail your patient. He didn't mention Nathan by name. He didn't need to. Nathan became chief of trauma surgery 6 months later. And on his first day in that office, he instituted a new policy. Every surgical resident would be required to study case histories where protocols had failed patients and cases where breaking protocol had saved them. He called it the Torres curriculum. The point wasn't to encourage cowboys. The point was to teach young surgeons that medicine is not a religion. Protocols are guidelines, not commandments. And sometimes, rarely, dangerously, but sometimes, the patient in front of you matters more than the rulebook in your head. Mia Torres graduated from college 2 years later with a degree in biomedical engineering. She designs surgical instruments now, specifically vascular repair tools. She told Nathan in an email that she wanted to make sure other surgeons had better options than the ones he'd had that night. Her first patent was for an improved iliac artery clamp. She named it the Michael. Last I heard, she was working on her PhD and dating someone her mother describes as totally wrong for her, but making her happy. She runs half marathons now, which her surgical team said should have been impossible given the extent of her injuries. She sends Nathan a Christmas card every year, always the same message. "Still here. Thank you for breaking the rules." Here's the thing about that night that still haunts Nathan, even now. He almost stopped. When Harrison grabbed his arm, when his mentor, his friend, told him directly to close, Nathan almost listened. For one terrible second, he almost followed the rule that had been burned into surgical training for decades. And if he had, Mia Torres would have died on that table. Just like her uncle. Just like the rule said she probably would anyway. But Nathan did something that most surgeons are too afraid to do. He looked at the patient, Not the statistics, not the protocols, not the weight of conventional wisdom, but the actual human being bleeding out in front of him. And he made a choice. Not the safe choice, not the career-protecting choice, the right choice. Because sometimes the most important thing a doctor can do is trust themselves enough to be wrong, to take the risk that no one else will take, to keep cutting when everyone tells you to stop. That's what separates the good surgeons from the great ones. It's not the steady hands or the medical knowledge or the years of training. It's the willingness to stand alone in a room full of doubt and say, I'm going to try. Mia Torres is alive today because one surgeon refused to let fear make his decision. And somewhere in Detroit, there's a chief of trauma surgery who still keeps a photograph of a young construction worker on his desk. A reminder of the patient he couldn't save and the one he did. Every rule in medicine was written in the blood of patients who died so that future patients might live. Those rules matter. They save countless lives every single day. But every rule also has an edge case. A patient who doesn't fit the statistics. A moment when the textbook is wrong. The hardest part of being a doctor isn't learning the rules, it's knowing when to break them. And that's the story of the surgeon who was told to stop, but kept cutting anyway. Stories like these happen in hospitals more often than anyone wants to talk about. The calls that go against protocol. The decisions made in seconds that change lives forever. Tomorrow I've got one about a pediatric ICU nurse who noticed something in a child's pupils that 3 doctors had missed. What she found led to a discovery that none of them were prepared for. Subscribe if you don't want to miss that one. And if you've ever worked in a hospital, if you've ever seen a moment where someone had to choose between the rules and the patient, I want to hear about it. Drop that story in the comments. Because the best medical stories aren't the ones I find. They're the ones you've lived. Until next time.